Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wasatch Reading Club. I'm glad you're back here with me today. Today's video is about why I abandoned the whole class novel in my classroom, why I quit reading a book altogether with the whole class. So stay with me, and if this is something that you're interested in, I'll explain all about it.
We are forever learning, one step at a time. As long as the world is turning, I'll be by your side.
All right, the whole class novel. This is where the teacher takes a lot of the class period to read a book together as a class. The reason why a teacher might do this is because there's just not enough money for a book for everyone, all of the kids in the school, all of the kids that that teacher teaches. So if a teacher teaches even 100 kids and sometimes 200 students, they don't have enough money to have enough books for everyone to take the book home and read it on their own time. So they have a classroom set, whether that's 30 books or 40 books, depending on the size of the class, and they have to take time in class to read it together. So the whole class novel is something that's just been going on forever. Everybody talks about things that they had to read in their high school English class or maybe their junior high English class. And a lot of times students just didn't enjoy the experience. So I decided, last year was my first year that I did it, I decided to quit reading the novel together. And I was really afraid about it at first, but I realized after reading a book that I really love, that it's just not fair to the students to expect them to be successful. It's not fair to have that kind of an expectation for students to read something that is going slow or is something that's not interesting to them. So I read a book a couple summers ago called The Book Whisperer by Donna Lynn Miller. And this is kind of an educator book review. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this or heard about this book. It's a fantastic read. It's pretty short. It's an awesome professional development book for teachers. And the whole purpose of the book is to explain how students are not the same, and that if you want to individualize your classroom, specifically the English classroom or the language arts classroom, then you need to take time for your students to read the book that they want to read. Now, this is kind of a difficult thing. A lot of teachers have a hard time letting go of class time because there's so much to cover. But I found that it's a pretty successful way to get students back into reading. I think a lot of kids, when they're in elementary school or primary school, they like to read because they get to read some interesting stories. Maybe teachers read to them after lunch, and that time listening to a story, having somebody read to them is just a super experience for them. And then through middle school or junior high, they have to start reading books all together as a class, and they're forced into it, and it becomes work, and it's not fun, and their assignments are related to it, and it's just frustrating. And the thing about that is maybe the kid needs to read that book, but maybe it's not time for the student to read that book. So something that comes out of this book, The Book Whisperer, and this is quoting from Donna Lynn Miller, but this is why I do what I do, and there's a page where she talks about no one particular book can meet the needs of all readers. Not everyone's on the same level. Reading a whole class novel takes too long. Some kids are quick readers, some kids are slower readers, but having to read it all at the same pace with a teacher or with other people reading, it's not fun. Laboring over a novel reduces comprehension. The longer that you take, the more boring it becomes, and students just start to check out. They don't care. They've already read the page or they've already read the chapter. You've already asked 15 questions. Why are we still on this chapter? Another thing that is difficult with a whole class novel is not enough time is spent reading. There's too much that has to do with comprehension and questions, and did you get this, and what does this word mean, and all the different elements of literature that we think that students need to have, when really they just need time practicing. Reading takes practice. It just takes time. Do it over and over and over again with different stories, different books, and maybe a student needs an intervention, but more often than not, students just need practice. They just need time doing it. Whole class novels ignore students' interest in what they like to read. Maybe everybody should read To Kill a Mockingbird. That's not the debate here. Maybe everybody should read Animal Farm. Maybe everybody should read The Odyssey. But not at the same time, not at the same age level. It's just too much sometimes for kids. Whole class novels also devalue prior reading experience. So if a student is jumping from something that's kind of low level because that's where their reading level is, and now they're expected to read something difficult like 1984 or Fahrenheit 451, that's just telling them that their previous reading experience isn't worth anything because they're not up to speed now. Forcing students to read class like we think everyone should read The Great Gatsby or The Catcher in the Rye or whatever the classics are, that's not fair. They might not be ready for the themes that exist in the story. They might not be ready for the content of the story. They might not be ready for language. And I don't necessarily mean like vulgar language or swearing or anything. I mean difficult language, like if you were to read Charles Dickens or The Scarlet Letter. Not everyone is ready to read difficult language. They might not have comparable experiences. If you read The Great Gatsby in junior high or high school, I feel sorry because some of the things that are in The Great Gatsby, the things that make it great, a lot of people don't get until they're in their later teen years or maybe even an adult, just because of the things that are talked about or the illusions, not like illusions like a magician. They might not get it because of the time period. Kids that are 12, 13, 14 years old, trying to figure out what's going on in a certain story, they might not just it doesn't make sense. They don't know what life was like at that point in time. And then structure. Like if you want a middle school or junior high kid to read Frankenstein and it's a story within a story within a story, they're going to get lost. I mean, some kids are probably going to be able to read it, but reading should be something that is available for a student at their level, maybe challenge them a little bit. So how do I do this? How do I avoid reading a whole class novel? How do I keep so many kids in a class period under control? Under control is relative, right? But at the beginning of the school year, I really trust my librarian, my school library media specialist, to put together a bunch of tables with a bunch of different genres of books, nonfiction and fiction, and we give the students an overview of how the library works, where things are, and then give them time to peruse 8 to 10 books per genre. They don't have to read them. They just do what we do to find out if we like a book. Look at the cover, read the flap on the inside, read the back, read what other people have said about the book. I spend some time going to the different book review sites like Kirkus or Goodreads so that students can see what other people have said about the books that they're checking out, whether or not they think that book will be interesting for them. And then after that library visit, that first book tasting where they're exposed to all of the different genres and the popular books, we regularly go back to the library. So if they didn't like a book or if they got a book and it was really good and they finished it really fast, they can come back and check out another book. So I spend the first 15 or 20 minutes every class period reading. And I expect every student to have a book. We go to the library. They can use their ebooks on their phones or their tablets. There's pretty much no excuse for a kid not to be reading in my class. And then they learn some responsibility, learn some timing and schedule management of their schedule, management of their calendar. When a book is due, it's up to them to make sure that it gets back. So what are we supposed to be teaching about reading? If a student is spending all of their reading time reading books that they enjoy, how do they learn the things that we're supposed to be teaching them about literature? Things like theme and literary elements, allusion and hyperbole and metaphor. They should know those things by the time they hit high school, but if they haven't or if they forgot or for whatever reason they just don't know, I use short stories. And I don't try to pack all of those elements into the one short story. Like if there's a lot of hyperbole, we'll just focus on hyperbole. What is hyperbole? This is what it looks like. This is how this author uses it. What's the difference between a simile and a metaphor? We can pull out a short story or an article and see how the author uses similes or metaphors and just focus on that one element. If we're trying to figure out author intent, why the author wrote the short story or the news article, we can break that down in a really short period of time, and then they can apply what they've learned to what they're reading on their own time, the things that they're fascinated with. I love giving kids the opportunity to read. I love talking about books with students, and I love hearing what they think about books, especially if I've recommended something or if they've recommended something to me and I read it. It's awesome to have a real conversation about something that we both enjoy or thought was frustrating or thought was scary. Letting students choose their own books is a really big deal, and giving them the time, trusting them to just read and practice that experience and investigate what something might mean if they don't understand a word, it's a really big deal. So Donalyn Miller, when she's writing this book, talks about her experience as a teacher in the 6th grade, which you might think they have more time to read in the elementary school or maybe the middle school setting. But I've tried it with my sophomores, 10th graders, and it works. Obviously, there are kids that don't like to do it. There are kids that really get into it. One thing that I want to adjust this coming year is to give the kids a tracking sheet so they can keep track of the books that they like, the books that they don't like, books that they had to return early, books that they couldn't finish. Some students will see the thickness of a book and think, oh, that's awful. There's no way I'm going to read this. But when they get into it, they can't stop. They can't put it down. They have to keep turning the page to find out what happens next. And by the time that they're done reading, they're shocked that they found a book that they liked that was bigger than they thought they could handle. So I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope that you got something out of this video. I hope that whether you are a teacher, maybe you're thinking about becoming a teacher, or maybe you are a parent that is involved with the classroom, hopefully this will help in maybe clarifying the way that reading should be. I think the way that reading should happen in a classroom, especially if we're talking about individualized learning or modifying learning so that students own some of their own experience, that students actually learn something that's important to them and helps them be more successful, more literate, more aware, more critical in thinking in the future, in their careers, in their lives, whatever it is that they do in the future. Thanks for stopping by today. I hope this was helpful to you. If you liked it, click the like button. If you haven't yet, subscribe. I really appreciate the support. Let me know what you think about the video. If there's any thoughts that you have about this kind of controversial topic, especially with English teachers who love literature, love reading, and want everybody to love it. How do we get them? How do we get other people? How do we get students to appreciate literature? How do we get students to appreciate reading? I think it's just by giving them time to read. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.